Welcome to the mysterious sleep tales. Wherever you are tonight, relax and let the weight of the day slowly lift from you. There is nothing to concern yourself with in these quiet hours, nothing to eagerly await until the morning light and its gentle insistence return. For now, there's only this silence and a voice calling you to rest. This hour is yours alone. Feel the surface beneath you. Feel how it effortlessly holds you, how it shapes the familiar contours of your resting body. Tonight, we're going to a small room in London in 1887. It is very late, long past the hour when much of the city has drawn its curtains, lit its fireplaces, and fallen asleep. The streets outside are shrouded in such a dense and stagnant fog that it seems more like a substance than an atmospheric condition, a gray woolen fabric carefully draped over the roofs, chimneys, and iron railings, suppressing every sound, softening every silhouette, even the gas lamps stretching along the pavement, appearing as nothing more than pale amber specks hanging in the darkness. You can't see more than a few steps in any direction. The cobblestones below are damp, and this dampness carries the characteristic smell of soot and the faint mineral scent of river water, a smell unique to a city that burns millions of coal fires every winter evening and inhales their residue. But we are not in that mist. We are inside, behind a dark oak door, locked with a brass lock that has long since lost its shine, sealed against the cold. We are in a room above a narrow shop front on a street not far from Sykenwell Green, in the district where London's watchmaking industry has been home for over a century. The streets here bear the marks of their purpose. The small workshops and attic rooms are entirely devoted to the many sub-branches of watchmaking, from escapement making and fuse cutting to plate machining and turning brass gears smaller than a shirt button. During the day, if you walk these pavements, you can hear the soft, constant tapping of a hammer on metal or the hum of a hand-turned lathe from behind the shuttered windows. The sounds are so small and private. They seem to belong not to the industrial world, but to the world of insects whose entire existence is the size of a fingernail. But at this hour, there are no such sounds, for the workshops are silent. Their creatures have long since gone to their lodgings and dinners. The only workshop still lit, the only window still gleaming with the amber warmth of a paraffin lamp, is the workshop we have come to visit. This hour belongs to a watchmaker whose name is unimportant, for he is not a famous or distinguished man, but simply a man who has spent much of his 40 years hunched over the open cases of pocket watches, examining the tiny brass and steel scenes within with a magnifying glass, and try to return them to their purposeful, patient, rhythmic life. He is neither young nor very old, but years of intense work have deepened the lines around his eyes and given his shoulders a permanent, endearing hunch. It reflects the posture of one who has spent his life bending over small, intricate, almost invisible things. The room in which he works is not large. It might once have been a bedchamber, or perhaps a sitting room, in the days before it was given over entirely to his trade. A single window faces the street below, but the curtain has been drawn across it, a curtain of heavy green baize that has faded in places to the color of old moss, and which serves as much to keep out the drafts as to preserve any privacy. The walls are papered in a pattern that has long since lost the confidence of its original design, something floral, perhaps, or geometric, now reduced by years of lamp smoke and the slow abrasion of time, to a uniform shade of brown that is not unpleasant, merely unremarkable, the kind of color that asks nothing of the eye and offers nothing in return but the quiet assurance that it will still be there tomorrow. Against one wall stands a tall cabinet of dark wood, its glass-fronted doors slightly ajar, and behind that glass one can make out the shapes of pocket watches in various states of completion, some resting in small felt-lined trays, some hanging from tiny hooks, their chains coiled beneath them like sleeping serpents. There are watch cases of silver and of gold, cases that have been engraved with initials or with scenes of pastoral beauty, cases worn smooth by decades of habitual handling, and cases so new they still carry the faint luster of the silversmith's final polish. Each one awaits its turn at the bench, and each one carries within it a story that the watchmaker does not need to know, for his concern is not with the lives these timepieces have accompanied, but with the mechanism itself, the small and marvelous engine that measures out the hours and the minutes and the seconds with a constancy that no human heart, however faithful, can quite achieve. The bench at which he sits is the heart of the room, and it is here that our attention may rest, as it does, for the long and quiet hours that lie ahead. It is a sturdy affair, built of oak that has darkened with age and with the oils of innumerable hands, its surface scored with the fine scratches and shallow grooves that are the signatures of a lifetime's labor. It is not a tidy bench, for tidiness in the absolute sense is the enemy of useful work, but it is ordered in the way that matters, which is to say that every tool and every component has a place that the watchmaker's hand knows by instinct, even when his eyes are occupied elsewhere. Upon the bench, arranged with the particular logic of long habit, lie the instruments of his craft. There are screwdrivers of several sizes, their handles turned from boxwood, their blades ground to a thinness that would astonish anyone unacquainted with the demands of the work. There are tweezers of tempered steel, their tips so fine that they can grip a single hair of brass wire, a single spoke of a wheel no wider than a grain of sand. There is a loop, a small magnifying glass set in a ring of black metal, which he wears in his right eye when the work requires it, holding it in place by a faint contraction of the muscles around the socket, a habit so deeply practiced that he is no longer conscious of the effort. And there are oilers, long-handled needles tipped with the merest bead of watch oil, thinner than a cat's whisker, used to place a single drop of lubrication upon a pivot or a jewel bearing with a precision that approaches the devotional. The lamp that lights his work sits at the far left corner of the bench, its brass column rising to a reservoir of pale green glass from which a cotton wick draws its supply of paraffin oil. The flame, adjusted to its lowest useful brightness, casts a circle of warm golden light upon the bench surface, and within that circle the watchmaker's hands move with the unhurried deliberation of a man who has learned that haste is the surest path to error. Beyond that circle, the room falls away into a comfortable dimness, a dimness in which the shapes of furniture and shelving become merely suggested, merely intimated, like the half-remembered details of a dream that is content to remain unfinished. At the center of the bench, resting upon a square of soft chamois leather, is the watch. It is a pocket watch, a gentleman's timepiece in a case of hallmarked silver, its face protected by a hinged cover that the watchmaker has opened and folded back. The dial is of white enamel, the hours marked in Roman numerals of the deepest black, the hands of blued steel, slender and graceful, and at the position of 6 o'clock, a smaller subsidiary dial records the passage of seconds with a hand so thin it seems scarcely more than a shadow upon the porcelain surface. The case bears the unmistakable signs of regular use. A fine network of scratches upon its back, a slight wearing of the hinge, a warmth in the metal that speaks of years spent close against the body of its owner, carried in a waistcoat pocket, consulted 100 times a day, wound each morning with the same key, in the same chair, with the same absent-minded ritual that belongs to the deepest habits of domestic life. But the watch has stopped. Its hands stand at 20 minutes past 9, and they have stood there for some time, perhaps days, perhaps longer, the silence within the case as complete and as final as the silence of a room from which the last guest has departed. It is this silence that the watchmaker means to remedy, and he approaches the task not with the urgency of a man who must meet a deadline, but with the calm and measured patience of one who understands that a watch, like any living thing, must be coaxed rather than compelled, listened to rather than merely commanded. He lifts the watch gently and turns it over in his hands, feeling its weight, its balance, the way it sits in his palm with the familiarity of a river stone worn smooth by long acquaintance with the current. He opens the back case with a flick of his thumbnail against the small indent provided for the purpose, and the movement is revealed, that miniature landscape of brass and steel and ruby that is the true face of the watch, the face it shows only to those who know how to read it. The top plate gleams dully in the lamplight, its surface marked with the engraved name of the maker, a London firm whose premises were once in Cheapside, and beneath that name a serial number in characters so small that they are legible only through the loop. He fits the loop to his eye, and the world contracts. The room, the lamp, the fog beyond the window, the city itself with its million sleeping souls, all of it recedes, and in its place there's only this, the tiny architecture of the movement, magnified now to a landscape of extraordinary detail and precision. He can see the balance cock, that slender bridge of brass that holds the upper pivot of the balance wheel, its surface decorated with a pattern of engraved scrollwork that serves no mechanical purpose but which speaks of a time when even the hidden parts of a watch were made with an eye to beauty. He can see the regulator, that small curved arm by which the effective length of the hairspring may be adjusted, and upon it the words slow and fast marked in script so fine that a lesser hand might have mistaken them for the scratchings of a pen. The balance wheel itself is still. It ought to be turning, oscillating back and forth 5 times each second, its rim catching the light as it swings, the hairspring coiling and uncoiling with each reversal like a tiny breath drawn in and released, drawn in and released, the heartbeat of the watch, the pulse upon which all its functions depend. But it is motionless, and the watchmaker studies it with the patient attention of a physician examining a patient who has not yet spoken of his complaint. He does not touch it, not yet. He merely looks, turning the watch this way and that beneath the loop, letting the light fall upon it from different angles, seeking the small clue, the faint irregularity, the almost imperceptible displacement that will tell him where the trouble lies. There is a ticking in the room, but it does not come from the watch upon the bench. It comes from the wall behind him, where a Longcase Clock stands in the shadows, its pendulum swinging with the stately regularity of a metronome. This clock is his companion in the late hours. Its voice is steady, unhurried pulse that marks the passage of time with an authority that the silent pocket watch upon his bench can only aspire to regain. The sound is so familiar to him that he no longer hears it consciously, any more than one hears one's own breathing, and yet it is there, always there, a rhythm beneath the silence, a heartbeat beneath the stillness. And if it were suddenly to stop, he would feel its absence as keenly as a change in the temperature of the room. He sets the pocket watch down again upon its leather square and reaches for the smallest of his screwdrivers. It has a blade ground to a width of perhaps half a millimeter, and its boxwood handle, polished to a deep honey color by years of use, fits between his thumb and forefinger with the intimacy of an old friendship. He positions the blade against the first of the tiny screws that secure the balance cock to the top plate, and with a motion so gentle it is scarcely distinguishable from stillness, he begins to turn. The screw resists for a moment, its thread stiffened by old oil that has thickened over time, and then it yields, turning smoothly, and the watchmaker draws it free and places it in a small brass tray at the edge of the bench, where it rests among its fellows, each one so small that a careless breath might send it skittering across the surface and off the edge into the oblivion of the floorboards below. He removes the balance cock with the delicacy of a man lifting a sleeping child from a cradle, holding it between the tips of his tweezers and setting it aside upon another square of chamois. Beneath it, the balance wheel lies exposed, and now he can see the hairspring in its entirety, that impossibly fine coil of tempered steel that spirals outward from the collet at the center of the balance staff, each turn separated from the next by a space so narrow that the individual coils are almost indistinguishable from one another. It is a thing of extraordinary refinement, this spring, for upon its regularity depends the accuracy of the entire timepiece, and the slightest deformation, the merest bending of a single coil, can throw the watch into a disorder from which only the most careful hands can rescue it. The watchmaker examines the hairspring for a long while, turning the movement slowly, watching how the coils lie in relation to one another, checking their concentricity, their spacing, their freedom from the entanglement that is the perpetual enemy of this most delicate of components. The lamplight catches the steel, and for a moment the spring glows with a faint blue iridescence, the color of tempered metal, the color of an autumn sky reflected in still water. He finds nothing amiss. The hairspring is clean and true, its coils evenly spaced, its terminal curve undeformed. He notes this with a small, satisfied inclination of his head and moves on. Now he turns his attention to the escapement, that ingenious arrangement of lever and wheel by which the energy of the mainspring is parceled out to the balance in measured, equal impulses, 5 times each second, 18,000 times each hour, 250,000 times each day. The English lever escapement, as employed in this watch, is a thing of particular elegance, for it achieves its purpose through the interaction of just 3 components: the escape wheel, with its sharply pointed teeth; the pallet fork, with its 2 jeweled surfaces that alternately lock and release the wheel; and the impulse pin upon the roller of the balance staff, which gives the pallet fork its instructions, as it were, telling it when to open and when to close. He lifts the pallet fork free and holds it beneath the loop. The jewels are intact, their surfaces polished to a luster that renders them almost transparent, and the acting faces, those tiny angled planes upon which the teeth of the escape will bear, show no sign of chipping or excessive wear. He turns the palette in the light, watching the jewels catch and release the lamplight in small prismatic flashes, red and green, and the faintest suggestion of violet. And then he sets it aside, satisfied that the fault does not lie here. The room is very quiet. The Longcase Clock continues its unhurried commentary, and from somewhere far away, muffled by the fog and the closed window and the heavy curtain, there comes the sound of a cab horse passing along the street below, the slow clop of iron shoes upon wet stone, a sound that arrives and departs so gradually that it seems less a sound than a memory of one, a recollection of movement in a world that has otherwise come to rest. The watchmaker does not look up. His attention remains upon the open movement, upon the small brass landscape that lies before him like a country scene from a great height, every field and lane and hedgerow visible, every detail sharp and clear and laden with meaning to the eye that knows how to read it. He removes the top plate now, exposing the train of wheels that lies between the plates, and here is the full machinery of the watch laid bare. The center wheel, the third wheel, the fourth wheel, each one meshing with the pinion of the next in a chain of diminishing size and increasing speed, a cascade of motion that begins at the mainspring barrel and ends at the escapement, converting the slow unwinding of the spring into the rapid oscillation of the balance, with a mathematical precision that has not changed in its essentials since the mechanism was first conceived. And here, too, is the fusee, that cone-shaped pulley that is the particular hallmark of the English pocket watch, and which serves to equalize the varying force of the mainspring as it unwinds. A fine chain of interlocking steel links, each one smaller than a grain of rice, connects the mainspring barrel to the fusee, winding upon the spiral groove that runs from the narrow apex of the cone to its broad base. When a mainspring is fully wound and its tension at its greatest, the chain pulls upon the smallest diameter of the fusee, and the torque transmitted to the wheel train is thereby moderated. As the spring runs down and its force diminishes, the chain moves to the wider portions of the cone, and the greater leverage compensates for the reduced power. It is a solution of such simple elegance that one might almost call it beautiful, and the watchmaker, who has seen it 10,000 times, still feels a quiet admiration for the mind that first conceived it, centuries ago, when the problem of maintaining a constant force from an inconstant spring was among the most vexing in all of mechanical philosophy. He runs his finger along the chain, feeling each link for roughness or deformity, and finds one that does not move as freely as its neighbors. A tiny spot of corrosion, perhaps, or a minute particle of grit lodge between the link plates. He lifts the chain with his tweezers and brings it closer to the loop, and there it is, a speck of something dark and hard, no larger than a mote of dust, wedged into the joint of a single link. He reaches for one of his oilers, touches its tip to a small well of cleaning fluid, and applies it to the obstruction with a steadiness of hand that seems almost inhuman in its precision. The speck loosens. He draws it away with the point of a needle, and the link moves freely once more, swinging in its socket with the silent ease of a well-oiled hinge. It is so small a thing, this mote of grit, this almost invisible impediment. And yet it was enough to halt the turning of the fusee, to interrupt the flow of power from the mainspring to the wheel train, to silence the balance wheel and bring the watch to a standstill. The watchmaker knows this. He has seen it many times before, how the whole elaborate mechanism of a timepiece, with all its wheels and springs and jewels, can be defeated by something so small that the naked eye might miss it entirely. There is a lesson in this, perhaps, about the fragility of all ordered systems, about the disproportionate consequences of the smallest interruption. But the watchmaker is not a man given to philosophical reflection. He is a man given to the patient application of skill, and the lesson he draws is a practical one, that cleanliness is the first virtue of his trade, and that the greatest enemy of a watch is not violence or misuse, but the slow accumulation of the invisible. He reassembles the chain upon the fusee, taking care that each link sits properly in its groove, and then he turns his attention to the mainspring. To inspect it, he must open the barrel, a cylinder of brass no wider than a sovereign, within which the mainspring is coiled like a ribbon of steel wound upon itself many times over. The barrel cap is held in place by a friction fit, and he pries it free with the tip of a blade, gently, for the mainspring within is under tension, and a careless hand might release it with a force that would send the delicate spring leaping from the barrel in a tangle of ruined steel, a catastrophe from which there is no easy recovery. The spring lies quietly within its housing, coiled in orderly layers, its inner end hooked to the barrel arbor, its outer end fixed to the barrel wall. The watchmaker turns the barrel slowly, watching the spring through the loop, checking for signs of fatigue or fracture, for the faint discoloration that precedes a break, for the unevenness of tension that indicates a spring past its useful life. He finds none. The spring is sound, its temper good, its surface free from a rust that is the particular affliction of steel in this damp and smoky city. He replaces the barrel cap, pressing it home with the flat of his thumb until it seats with a faint, reassuring click. The Longcase Clock behind him strikes the half hour, a single clear note that rings through the quiet room and then subsides, leaving the silence a little deeper than it was before, as a stone dropped into a pool leaves the surface a little stiller once the ripples have passed. The watchmaker pauses in his work, not because the clock has reminded him of the hour, but because the sound has created a small opening in his concentration, a space in which the room itself reasserts its presence. He becomes aware of the warmth of the lamp, of the faint smell of paraffin oil and brass polish, of the fog pressing against the window like a living thing seeking entry. He becomes aware of the stillness of his own body, the way his shoulders have settled into their habitual stoop, the way his hands rest upon the bench with the quiet confidence of instruments that know their purpose. He rises from his stool, slowly, for his back has stiffened during the long period of sitting, and he stands for a moment with his hands pressed against the small of his spine, stretching the muscles that have contracted around the long curve of his concentration. The room, seen from this upright vantage, reveals itself more fully. There is a small cast-iron stove in one corner, its firebox fed with coal that is burned down to a bed of glowing embers, and from its open grate a warmth radiates that keeps the worst of the cold at bay, without ever quite dispelling it. Near the stove stands a kettle, blackened with use, and beside it a cup and saucer of plain white china, the cup still bearing the brown ring of tea drunk earlier in the evening. He crosses to the stove and holds his hands before it, palms open, absorbing the heat into fingers that have grown cool from the long manipulation of cold metal. The warmth enters him slowly, creeping upward through his wrists and into his forearms, and with it comes a loosening, a softening, as though the heat were dissolving not merely the chill in his hands, but some deeper tension that has been held there without his knowing. He stands like this for some minutes, his eyes half closed, his breathing slow and even, and in this interval the room seems to settle around him, to compose itself into a scene of such perfect quietude that it might have been arranged by an artist, every object in its place, every shadow exactly where it ought to be. When he returns to the bench, he does so with the refreshed attention of a man who has stepped briefly away from a page of close type and returned to it with eyes newly able to see. He takes his seat upon the stool, adjusts the lamp so that its light falls more directly upon the watch, and picks up his tweezers. The movement lies open before him, its train of wheels exposed, and he begins the process of reassembly, that careful, reverential act of putting back together what has been taken apart, each component returning to its proper place with the inevitability of a note returning to its place in a familiar melody. He replaces the fourth wheel first, lowering it into its pivot holes with a motion so controlled that the wheel seems to float into position of its own accord, and then the third wheel, and then the center wheel, each one finding its seat with a faint, almost inaudible click that is to the watchmaker's ear as satisfying as the turning of a well-fitted key in a well-fitted lock. The plates are brought together, the pillars aligned, the screws driven home, and now the movement is whole again, its inner workings concealed once more beneath the shelter of the top plate, all that complexity hidden away, as the workings of heart are hidden beneath the ribs. He replaces the palette fork, guiding it into position with the patience of a man threading a needle by candlelight, and then the balance wheel with its hairspring, that most critical of all the components, the element upon which the whole enterprise of timekeeping depends. He lowers the balance cock over the upper pivot of the balance staff and secures it with its single tiny screw, turning the screwdriver with a pressure so slight that it is scarcely distinguishable from thought itself. And now comes the moment. He takes the watch key, a small brass instrument whose bow is shaped like a clover leaf, and fits it to the winding square upon the fusee. He turns it, slowly, feeling the chain draw taut, feeling the mainspring within its barrel begin to accept the coil of stored energy that will, if all has been done correctly, sustain the watch through the hours and the days to come. One turn, two, three, each one delivered with the same measured, unhurried tempo, and with each turn the tension in the chain increases, the fusee rotates upon its arbor, and the mainspring, deep within its brass chamber, winds tighter and tighter, gathering force, gathering patience, gathering the potential for 100,000 ticks not yet uttered. He withdraws the key and holds the watch in his open palm. For a moment, there is nothing. The balance wheel remains still, the dial remains fixed at 9:20, and the silence in the room is absolute, save for the patient commentary of the Longcase Clock upon the wall. And then, with a motion so sudden and so slight that it seems less a beginning than a continuation of something that has always been happening, the balance wheel stirs. It swings tentatively at first through a small arc, and then with growing confidence through a wider one, and the hairspring coils and uncoils, coils and uncoils, and the palette fork begins its measured rocking, and the escape wheel advances one tooth, and another, and another, and from the watch there rises a sound, faint and steady and unutterably familiar, the ticking of a timepiece restored to life. The watchmaker listens. He holds the watch close to his ear, turning it slowly, listening to the tick from different positions, checking that the beat is even, that the sound from one swing of the balance matches the sound from the return, that there is no irregularity, no hesitation, no hint of a stumble that would indicate a fault not yet resolved. The tick is steady. It is clean and precise, each impulse delivered with the same measured force, the same duration, the same small, bright sound, like the tapping of a fingertip upon a window pane or the dripping of water into a basin in a very quiet house. He nods. Once, a small gesture of acknowledgement directed not at any observer, but at the watch itself, as one might nod to a companion who has completed a difficult task without complaint. He glances at the Longcase Clock and notes the time. It is 1:30 in the morning. The fog will not lift until well after dawn, and the streets will remain empty for hours yet. There is no reason to hurry. There is never any reason to hurry. He sets the pocket watch upon the bench, its face upward, and adjusts the hands to match the Longcase Clock, turning the small arbor at the edge of the movement with a thin steel rod until the minute hand and the hour hand align with the correct time, and the seconds hand begins its slow, steady circuit of the subsidiary dial, measuring out the moments with the patient precision of a man counting grains of sand. He leans back upon his stool and regards the watch with the quiet satisfaction of completed work. The dial glows faintly in the lamplight, its white enamel surface luminous against the dark chamois, the hands casting the thinnest of shadows upon the face. The seconds hand moves in small, precise steps, 5 per second, each one accompanied by the faintest perceptible vibration of the case, a tremor so slight that it is felt rather than seen, as one feels the pulse in one's own wrist without looking at it. But the watchmaker's evening is not yet over. There are other watches waiting, though none with any urgency. Upon the bench, to the right of the newly revived timepiece, lies another pocket watch, this one in a case of gold, its surface engraved with a monogram in the florid script that was fashionable some decades past. This watch, too, is silent, though its complaint is of a different nature. The watchmaker knows already what ails it, for he examined it briefly some days ago and diagnosed a worn pivot on the fourth wheel, a fault that requires the turning of a new pivot upon the lathe, a task he will not undertake tonight, for the lathe requires a steadiness of light and hand that is best attempted in the freshness of morning. Instead, he merely lifts the gold watch, turns it in his hands, and sets it down again, as one might pick up a book one intends to read tomorrow, simply to feel its weight and to confirm its presence. The paraffin lamp flickers, a small disturbance caused perhaps by a draft from the chimney, or perhaps by the lamp's own internal currents, and the shadows in the room shift and resettle, like the occupants of a theater adjusting their positions between acts. The watchmaker reaches out and turns the small brass wheel that controls the height of the wick, raising the flame by a fraction, and the light steadies, the shadows withdraw, and the bench is once more a circle of quiet gold in a room of quiet brown. He opens a drawer in the bench and withdraws from it a soft cloth, and with this cloth he begins to polish the silver case of the watch he has just prepared. It is not a necessary act, not in the strict sense, for the watch will keep time regardless of whether its case is polished or dull. But there is something in the ritual of it, something in the slow, circular motion of the cloth upon the metal that satisfies a need deeper than utility. The silver warms beneath his touch, and the scratches that mar its surface catch the light differently as the polish builds, becoming less a record of wear and more a testament to use, to the many pockets this watch has rested in, the many hands that have drawn it forth to consult it, the many moments of ordinary life that it has quietly attended. As he polishes, his mind drifts, not away from his work, but deeper into it, into the meditative state that long, repetitive labor induces, a state in which the hands continue their task without conscious direction and the mind floats free, not thinking precisely, but inhabiting a space between thought and stillness that is peculiarly restful, peculiarly complete. He is aware of the ticking of the pocket watch upon the bench, and of the deeper, slower ticking of the Longcase Clock behind him, and of the silence between and around these two voices, a silence that is not empty but full, a silence composed of the fog and the cold heat and the amber light and the immense, sleeping weight of the city beyond the walls. The cloth moves in its slow circles. The silver brightens. The seconds accumulate, unhurried, uncounted, each one identical to the last and to the next, each one a small, perfect interval of time measured out by the mechanism he has restored, the mechanism that will go on measuring long after he has set down his cloth and risen from his stool and extinguished the lamp and descended the narrow staircase to the street below. The watch will go on ticking in the darkness of the drawer or the pocket, faithful and unwavering, keeping time for no audience, needing no audience, performing its single, patient function with a constancy that asks for nothing in return. The Longcase Clock strikes two clear notes that sound and fade, and the watchmaker sets down his polishing cloth and folds it neatly and returns it to the drawer. He picks up the pocket watch and holds it one last time to his ear, and the tick is there, steady and sure, a small, bright voice speaking from the heart of the silver case, and he closes the back with a gentle pressure of his thumb, hearing the clasp engage with a muted snap, and then he closes the front cover over the dial, and the watch is whole again, complete, a sealed world of perpetual motion contained within a circle of metal no larger than a man's palm. He places it in the tray with the others that are finished, the watches that will be collected by their owners in the days to come, each one returned to its particular life, its particular pocket, its particular chain looped through a particular buttonhole. He does not wonder about the men who carry them, the gentlemen of business and the clerks of chancery and the physicians who consult them between patients and the barristers who glance at them in court. Their lives are as distant from his as the lives of the ships that pass upon the river are distant from the bridges under which they glide. His world is here, in this room, at this bench, within the small illuminated circle of the lamp, and it is enough. It has always been enough. He reaches for another watch, not the gold one with the worn pivot, but a third, a plainer timepiece in a case of gunmetal, whose owner has reported that it gains 2 minutes a day. This is a fault of regulation, not a mechanism, and it requires the adjustment of the regulator upon the balance cock, that small curved arm with its markings of slow and fast, by which the effective length of the hairspring is shortened or lengthened, the balance made to swing faster or slower, the rate of the watch brought into accord with the rate of the turning earth. It is the most delicate of adjustments, for the regulator acts upon the hairspring through a pair of curb pins so fine that they are barely visible even through the loop, and the distance between perfect timekeeping and a gain of 2 minutes a day is measured in fractions of the width of a human hair. He opens the back of the gunmetal watch and fits the loop to his eye. The balance wheel is turning, its oscillation brisk and confident, the hairspring breathing in and out with a rhythm that is, to the watchmaker's practiced ear, just perceptibly too fast, a haste so slight that no one but a man who has spent his life listening to the voices of watches would ever detect it. He reaches for the regulator with the tip of his finest screwdriver, and he adjusts it, moving it towards a mark labeled slow by a distance that would be invisible to the unaided eye, a distance that his hand measures not in increments, but in feeling, in the intuitive knowledge that comes from having performed this same gesture 10,000 times before. He holds the watch and waits. The balance wheel continues its oscillation, and the ticking continues, and the seconds hand continues its circuit, and the minutes hand advances by the smallest of degrees. He will need to let the watch run for some time, perhaps an hour, perhaps more, before he can determine whether the adjustment has been sufficient or whether a further correction is needed. This is the nature of regulation, a patience within a patience, a waiting that is itself a form of work, and the watchmaker is well accustomed to it. He sets the gunmetal watch upon the bench beside the Longcase Clock, where both can be consulted at a glance, and he sits back and lets the minutes pass. The fog outside shows no sign of thinning. If anything, it has grown denser, pressing more closely against the window, and the watchmaker can feel its presence even through the drawn curtain and the closed glass, a coolness that seeps into the room along the floorboards and gathers in the corners farthest from the stove. He rises, not with any urgency, and crosses to the stove, where he opens the grate and adds 2 lumps of coal from the scuttle beside it. The coal settles upon the embers with a soft crumbling sound, and in a moment or two a thin flame appears, licking upward around the edges of the fresh fuel, and the warmth in the room begins, very gradually, to reassert itself. He fills the kettle from a jug of water that stands on a shelf near the window and sets it upon the stove. He returns to the bench and seats himself once more, and now, with nothing particular to do but wait, he allows his gaze to wander over the surface of the bench, taking in the familiar landscape of tools and components and unfinished tasks. The small brass tray, with its constellation of screws, the chamois squares with their resting watches, the rack of screwdrivers standing in their wooden block like the pipes of a miniature organ. His eye falls upon a watch crystal lying in a small dish near the edge of the bench, a circle of clear glass ground to a gentle convexity, awaiting fitting to a case that sits beside it. He picks up the crystal and holds it between his fingers, turning it in the lamplight. It is a simple thing, this disk of glass, unremarkable in every way, and yet without it the dial beneath would be exposed to dust and moisture and the accidental contact of clumsy fingers, and the watch would be as vulnerable as a house without a roof. He sets the crystal down again and lets his hand rest upon the bench, palm flat against the warm wood, feeling the grain beneath his fingers, feeling the faint vibration that passes through the surface from the ticking watches that surround him, a vibration so slight that it is perceived less as a sensation than as a presence, the presence of time itself, measured and contained and patiently ongoing. The kettle begins to murmur upon the stove, a low, contented sound that rises gradually in pitch as the water within approaches its transformation. The watchmaker listens to it as he listens to his watches, with a practiced ear that reads meaning in small variations of tone and tempo. When the murmur becomes a steady singing, he rises and prepares his tea, spooning the dark leaves into the plain white cup and pouring the water over them with a careful, circular motion. The steam rises in a thin plume, carrying with it the fragrance of the leaves, a fragrance that is at once familiar and comforting, the scent of 100 such cups prepared at this hour, in this room, at this bench, over the span of more years than he cares to count. He lets the tea steep, watching the water darken, watching the leaves unfurl and settle, and when the color is right, neither too pale nor too strong, he lifts the cup and carries it back to the bench. The first sip is always the best, the warmth spreading through his chest like a small, contained fire, and he holds the cup in both hands for a moment, letting the heat pass through the china into his palms before setting it down at the far corner of the bench, well away from the watches and the tools. The gunmetal watch ticks on. The Longcase Clock ticks on. The fog holds the city in its soft, relentless grip. And the watchmaker sits at his bench in the circle of golden light, his tea cooling at his elbow, his tools arranged about him in their accustomed places, his hands resting upon the worn oak surface, and he is content. Not happy, precisely, for happiness is a word too large and too active for what he feels, but content, settled, at ease in a way that requires no justification and no explanation. The way a stone is at ease at the bottom of a stream, the way a shelf is at ease beneath its familiar burden of books. He picks up the gunmetal watch and checks it against the Longcase clock. 7 minutes have passed. The watch appears to be keeping better time than before, though it is too early to be certain. He sets it down again and takes another sip of tea. The lamp burns steadily. The stove glows. The fog presses against the window. And in the small, quiet room above the narrow shop front on the street, not far from Clerk and Well Green, the night continues its slow, unhurried passage towards the dawn that will come, eventually, as it always does, to dissolve the darkness and the fog, and to fill the streets once more with light and noise and the bustle of a city waking to its business. But not yet, not for hours yet. And until it does, there is this, only this, the bench, the lamp, the ticking, the stillness, and the watchmaker, patient and unhurried, attending to the small, precise, endlessly repeating work that is his portion and his piece. He turns the gunmetal watch over and examines the back of the case. There is an inscription there, scratched rather than engraved, in a hand that suggests the work was done not by a professional, but by the owner himself, perhaps with a penknife or a nail, and the words are simple. To J.H. from his loving wife, Christmas 1882. The watchmaker reads this without particular sentiment, for he has seen 1,000 such inscriptions, and each one tells the same story, the story of a gift given with affection, of a timepiece chosen with care, of a moment in which one person said to another, "Here, take this, carry it with you, and when you look at it, think of me." He does not know J.H. He does not know the loving wife. He knows only that the watch gains 2 minutes a day and that it has been entrusted to his care, and that when he returns it, running true to its owner, the inscription will still be there, patient and enduring, outlasting the oil and the pivots and the temper of the spring, and perhaps, in the end, the memory of the hand that scratched it. He sets the watch down and reaches for his cup of tea, and the liquid has cooled now to the temperature at which it is most pleasurable to drink, neither hot enough to scald nor cool enough to have lost its warmth, and he drinks slowly, savoring each mouthful, letting the warmth settle into him as the silence settles into the room. The Longcase clock ticks. The watches tick. The coal shifts in the grate with a soft, collapsing sound. And somewhere, far away, muffled beyond all recognition by the fog and the walls and the drawn curtains, a church bell rings, counting out an hour that the watchmaker does not trouble himself to note, for his clock's enough to tell him the time. And what the bell tells him instead is that the city is still there, still breathing, still turning beneath its blanket of fog, and that he is a part of it, a small and necessary part, doing his small and necessary work in his small and necessary room, and that this, too, is a kind of keeping time. The minutes pass. He finishes his tea and sets the cup aside. He picks up the gunmetal watch once more and compares it to the Longcase clock. The watch appears to be gaining only slightly now, perhaps half a minute per day at its current rate, and this is within the range that a second adjustment will correct. He opens the case and fits the loop and touches the regulator with the tip of his screwdriver, moving it by a distance that cannot be measured by any instrument he possesses, but only by the accumulated wisdom of his hands. And then he closes the case and sets the watch down once more to run, and the waiting begins again. He uses the interval to tidy the bench, sorting the screws in the brass tray by size, wiping down the surface of the chamois squares, cleaning the tips of his oilers with a scrap of soft tissue, arranging the screwdrivers in their rack with their blades aligned. It is not work, exactly, but it is activity, the kind of purposeful, unhurried activity that fills the spaces between tasks and gives them form, the way pauses between the notes of a slow melody give the melody its shape. His hands move with the easy competence of long practice, performing their tasks without instruction, leaving his mind free to rest in the pleasant limbo between engagement and repose. The stove has taken hold of the new coal now, and the room is warmer, the air carrying a faint, not unpleasant scent of burning, the scent of a London winter night, of a million fires doing their quiet, essential work behind a million closed doors. The watchmaker can feel the warmth on his back as he sits at the bench, and it is a comfort, a physical reassurance that counters the deep, persistent chill of the fog beyond the window. He thinks of nothing in particular. He lets his mind rest as his hands rest, in the easy, undemanding stillness that is the true gift of the late hours, the hours when the world has stopped asking questions and is content to simply be. The Longcase clock strikes three measured notes that fall into the silence and are absorbed by it, and the watchmaker checks the gunmetal watch once more. Is keeping time now. The second's hand moves in precise accord with the second's hand of the Longcase clock, the two of them advancing together, step by step, through the hours that remain of this long and quiet night. He nods, satisfied, and closes the case, and places the gunmetal watch in the tray with the others that are finished. Now there is nothing left to do but wait for the morning, and the watchmaker does not mind the waiting. He has spent his life in the company of time, measuring it, adjusting it, correcting it, restoring it to those who have lost track of it, and he has learned that time, when one ceases to struggle against it, becomes the gentlest of companions. It asks only to be allowed to pass, and in return it offers the most precious of gifts, the gift of the present moment, the moment in which one is here, alive, breathing, occupying a particular chair in a particular room in a particular city on a particular night, with a lamp burning and a stove glowing and the fog holding everything in its soft, encompassing embrace. He lowers the wick of the lamp just a little, and the circle of light contracts, drawing closer about him, and the shadows at the edges of the room deepen and grow warmer, as shadows do when they're no longer held at bay, but are allowed to settle into their natural places, like cats finding their preferred corners on a cold evening. The watchmaker folds his hands upon the bench and listens to the ticking, and it is enough. It is all there is, and all there needs to be the sound of the seconds passing one by one, each one a small, bright note in the long, unhurried song of the night. And if you, too, are listening now, wherever you are, in whatever room or bed or chair you have settled into for the night, know that you are welcome in this place. There is room at this bench for anyone who seeks the comfort of small, careful work, the peace of a task completed without haste, the satisfaction of a mechanism restored to its proper function. The ticking will continue, steady and sure, through the rest of the night and into the morning, and you may listen to it or let it fade as you choose, for it makes no demands, it asks for no attention. It simply is a heartbeat in the dark, a pulse in the silence, a companion for the hours that remain between now and the quiet coming of the dawn. Thank you, most sincerely, for spending this time in the company of the watchmaker and his midnight bench. It has been a gentle pleasure to share this quiet evening with you, and if you have found some rest within these words, then they have served their purpose well. Should you wish to return to this place, or to places very like it, you're always welcome here, and a kind word left quietly below, or the simple act of remaining close by for future evenings such as this one, would be received with the warmest gratitude. But there is no obligation, none at all, only the hope that you will sleep softly tonight, and that the hours ahead will be as calm and as kind as the ticking of a well-made watch in a still and sheltered room. Good night.